Hello, this is Mark. In this video I'm going to talk about anxiety and its relation to entropy. This is just a schematic I created. I'll just take it with a grain of salt. It's just my own viewpoint. Everyone's going to have a different viewpoint relating to anxiety. But here, what is shown is essentially this is it's a circle that, it shows the known information. This is an abstract illustration, but everyone has a certain quantity of information that is known, whether it's it could be related to memories, it could be related to knowledge, it could be related to ideas, so forth. It's a combination, a summation of all the elements in the mind that you're able to hold on to. And even in the subconscious, there's bits, you got the pieces that are put together, and you have a huge storage of memory that you may not be consciously aware of, the whole scale. But anyways, this is just the known information, and then beyond it, it's the unknown. So unknown information goes to infinity. We have a range of perception. We cannot witness every single element of, the subatomic particles. Every single aspect of information. There's so many bits that are present. Our mind cannot process every single bit, and so forth. But the unknown is just, the information or bits that is outside the known. It tends to infinity, and this is something that is a big indicator of whether or not you're prone to anxiety, because we tend to fear the unknown, whatever is beyond the perception of what we can understand, and so forth. And if we can't understand it, it can be fear. It could put us in another direction towards negative energy. But yeah, this is everyone's gonna have a different radius. So this is R1. The radius is essentially if you have a lot of information, you have a great memory, so forth. Or if you're open-minded, if you like exploring different avenues, different fields like mathematics, linguistics, physics, chemistry, you're going to expand this field. And this is steady state. So this is like when you're in this calm, you're not necessarily going to be in steady state, but it's approximate. When you're calm or relaxed, the rhythm, when you're in rhythm, your body's in equilibrium. Essentially you're in a pretty, you're not having to change, in the entropy and so forth. And you adapt to this state. So like whatever your processing speed would, however you process the bits of information, the transmissions that go on between your neurotransmitters, and the output that you create, it can definitely facilitate an increase in entropy if you have a change in neurotransmitter output, or you have norepinephrine, or you drink a lot of caffeine, or so we're always inducing this state, and we're causing different reactions. But essentially, assume this is steady state, and in this state when you're calm, or if you're open to the unknown, and there's different degrees, but in this state, that's why I put the arrows radially. You're basically, it's expansion. So in this state, you're globally increasing the output of information, and their storage. You're open to it. You're not fixated. Because here's the other illustration. This is what kind of happens in anxiety, or kind of in illustration. It can kind of give you an outline of my viewpoint. Everyone else will have a different, whether abstraction or however you view anxiety. But what this is showing is that it's a, instead of the arrows going out radially, it's now going inward. And basically these are bits. This is unknown. So if you take, like, for instance, you have an exam, and you may have the fear of failing. So that failure, that event that you create in your mind that hasn't happened, it's from the unknown. You have an unknown, or you may have like a new job, for instance, and you're trying to imagine, what is going to happen in the event. Well, that event hasn't occurred, but your imagination, could, and this tends to be negative, in the negative direction, positive to negative, so forth. So what ends up happening is, if you create that negative image in your mind, that, and it's from the unknown, and you fixate on it, this is where everything collapses, and the collapse is essentially what ends up happening is the mind is unable to deal with it. You become so fixated and everything outside your perception, everything, it just becomes chaotic. When you're calm, you can take, the inputs, and it's like flow. But once you go towards anxiety and things become compressed and you become so fixated on, small bits of or information, or, it could be even one event, everything else, like it's just, builds chaos, and it can induce the anxiety, this inward motion. And that anxiety will cause an increase in entropy. It becomes a chaotic state. And essentially, you can think of like entropy. So if you have we always have bits of information that we're intaking from our perception, or range of perception. So everyone has a different range. Some people it's broader, some people can intake more bits of information per unit time. And that's the key, because anxiety, when it speeds up entropy, increases entropy, increases, non-epinephrine or stress hormones, and that increases the speed of processing. You're more aware, and your brain's, the firing, it's increasing, and so forth, and it can cause a cascade of other problems. But it could upregulate even certain metabolic processes and so forth. So this change, it's causing in the mind, just that chaotic state, and you're essentially now, because everything's increasing, your heart rate, so forth, you're essentially you're taking in so many, or you're basically the bits, it all becomes now convoluted, because with the fixation and the negativity, you're essentially causing, you're not able to focus, clearly, and make those connections, so it's essentially becoming, and the reason it's becoming convoluted is because it's when you're in an anxious state that you haven't adapted to, your mind is going at a higher, frequency, and due to this process, like you're not adapted to the change in the state from your initial steady state to this transient state. And this transient state, or chaotic state, causes it can cause looser connections, or just and it can amplify, the anxiety or the effect, because now everything gets mixed up and disordered, because chaos, it's proportional to disorder or entropy. Anytime you have disorder, you can create mental events in your mind that a lot of times it's negative, because with the fixation and your compression, your unknown basically expands, and essentially now you're expanding, even into the negative realm. And just, a lot of times when you go in anxiety, you're exploring the unknown, but in a negative way. So you're basically, you have that inward chaos, but you're not able to really make sense, or of the information that is coming inward, and you're basically directing inward. So that, to me, can definitely be an issue with anxiety. It's just, it's proportional to, like, for instance, if you only have like a few bits of information, it's pretty easy. It's not, it's or it could be like you're in a crowd, you have a lot of people, a lot of variables. Well, in this case, that's why, like, when you increase this disorder, whether it's external or internal, it induces these states. When you have external disorder, this is where that limit comes in. What ends up happening here is essentially the limit. If you go from, let's suppose you're starting with the external. This limit is basically proportional, one with, the radius. The radius is essentially how much space or volume of area, or volume of space that you have opened, that you have delved in. Because a lot of times anxiety is, if you're always confining yourself in small space, you have a larger unknown, and therefore you have basically, but a lot of times, because we can fear, what hasn't happened, or what, events in our mind. But when the known is the smaller the predictions that you can make, you won't be able to make good judgments. So this, a lot of times, an unknown becomes, negative. You don't have the variables to, variables to put it all together. And then conversely, if your radius expands, you can be more comfortable, because that's like when you adapt to different environmental circumstances. So if you're in a very heavy crowd, or you're anxious when there's a lot of people, if you avoid these events, it can actually spur anxiety when you enter those events. Because eventually what ends up happening is you're imagining, like because induce anxiety. So a lot of times anxiety, it goes in a negative direction, and you have the negative imaginings of these events. But when you become very accustomed to the crowded areas, it lowers over time, and then your limit can actually go upward for such an event. So this is in terms with regards to the external. Now with the internal, if you have, like, let's say, your body, everything, your processes, everything, it's slowing down. Well, essentially, you're not able to process a lot of bits of information, so it'd be like one or two. So this is at the extreme. Let's say it's like you're watching a movie in slow motion. So it's, in viewing this, so basically this will compress the number bits of information that you can process at one given time frame, and that will generally it will affect the limit, because in this case the limit should go up, because you need a certain level of stimuli to induce the anxiety. So by going in slower motion, the events or the stimuli that triggered anxiety, the time is expanded. It takes more time to achieve that. But now when you go to chaotic state and your mind's in chaos, it converges to zero. You have so many inputs going through the mind that you're like the high probability you're going to trigger the anxiety. So therefore the limit approaches zero as chaos approaches infinity for the internal, and as chaos approaches infinity for the external, the limit approaches zero. But this graph, essentially, forgot to even state what the graph meant, so I kind of went on a tangent. But we all have a perceptual range, and these are bits of information. You build the connections between the bits, and with these connections, they're translated to the mind, the neuronal network. So basically, I define T as energy transferred to the neuronal network. So you basically, anytime you read or you do anything, you're inducing, you're stimulating the mind in some way. You're creating, all the impulses that go throughout the network. So this is a type of energy. And then you have of the system, you have the total energy output. So basically, that's the total amount of energy that you could induce throughout the whole system. And then N is the number of bits. So entropy essentially is, if you think of this function, it's the integral of this function, or the area under the curve divided by the total energy output. So, of course, if your area is smaller, you're going to have less anxiety. So that's because you're essentially, it's proportional to the numerator. So, it's whatever the area is. And I think I got that right. So basically, it should be the number of bits times the total energy transferred to the neuronal network, and then summation, or through each connection, divided by the total energy that could be produced in the whole system, because we can't process all the bits in the whole system. So that's essentially the increase in, you could think of an increase of entropy, which is a chaos. So if there's a higher area, you're going to have more chaos, essentially, because you have to deal with more information. And it's going to cause, the energy state's going to go up, and you're just causing the high level of stimulus. And eventually, when you reach this zone, anxiety, everything becomes amplified. And that's why, like, for an anxiety in this state, things, it's very hard to get back down here, because now everything's sped up. So yeah, this was just my viewpoint. Of course, I'm of course my camera now has a lot of entropy. I'm causing a lot of disorder, but anyways, yeah, I hope this was not too disorganized, but yeah, this is just how I view anxiety. You know, and it's I've dealt with it before, and really, what instigated it was I had a fixation on my imaginings. You know, something that really triggered it. So, you know, and you know, it's everyone deals with it, but the key is, you know, not to fear the unknown by putting yourself. You have to put yourself in the unknown to be able to adapt. So if you have a fear, try putting yourself in those environments, adapting, so you're expanding, and eventually you'll reach this, you know, state. Because this is essentially you'll be in this state as long as you or you know, this state, as long as you acclimate and adapt to the global, you know, the environment, or because eventually your anxiety will approach zero as you become adapted to that environment that induces anxiety. So yeah, this I'm gonna end it here. That was just my input on the matter.